a brief introduction. I guess the one thing I noticed our first slide here is that we're not the working group anymore, we're a committee. So very proud of that. It was announced yesterday at the second plenary at the second plenary. So, and then let's see, what else did I want to just say ahead of time? I think everything's going well. I think everybody's still pretty busy or catching up on things. So I see a lot of familiar names on the list here. And as I said, we'll go ahead and get started with Dr. Yu's presentation of, as we were just talking about it, it's listed as S2105 on the agenda, but it will be S2209 as a protocol. So I guess without further ado, we'll have Dr. Yu start. She notes that she's not going to be on camera because she's actually not in her office. So, but that's great. So, Dr. Yu, if you want to take off, we'll start with you.
Thank you so much, Stephen. This is actually great to be back to our VA SWOG group because I used to be part of you, and but I'm no longer working at the VA Ann Arbor. So it's my pleasure to present this concept to our VA colleagues, and we hope that VA can join us. We had this concept discussion in the last about a year already, and Janssen is the company who's interested in sponsoring this. So we had several meetings with them, and they are very enthusiastic about this study. So this is to address the multiple myeloma patient. As we know, myeloma, this disease actually is for more elderly patients with the onset of the disease age group around like around 70 years old. So many patients may be at their age with many comorbidities. So how to address this patient population and then serve those patients better? And this is a very relevant question for our myeloma patients. And the other issue is because of the age and also comorbidities, many times they probably only have like limited lines of therapy that they can receive. So we really want to give the best possible treatment for those patients. And if I recall correctly, we have pretty good amount of the myeloma patients in VA clinic. So that's why I feel it would be very relevant, if we can have our VA colleagues to join the study, it will be great. And I was very fortunate to be connected with Tom, who is the myeloma chair for VA group. So I hope that I will be able to work with him so that we can move the study forward. So at this moment, just to give you the update, this study was approved by Triage, and it will be moving to the next step, which is NCI steering committee approval. So we'll put the study on their agenda. Hopefully next month, they're able to review it. So next slide, please. Oh, I forgot to mention that we actually have three chairs, Dr. Sikander and also Bria and I, we work together, and of course with our myeloma committee chairs and also statisticians. So, so I briefly mentioned the background for this patient population. There's unmet needs, and it will be very appropriate. Actually, we got a lot of feedbacks and comments from steering committee, from NCI, as well as Janssen. This is a patient population that currently understudied, and we hope that this will be the first real world patient population study to suit the needs from our patients. So currently for this patient population, we have two regimens most commonly used. One is RVD, which is Revlimid, Velcade, and dexamethasone. RVD light actually is the same regimen, but with lower dose or less frequent dosing schedule based on the phase 2 study from MGH group published in 2018. And the daratumumab actually is an agent. It used to be approved in a relapsed patient setting, but now moved to upfront myeloma patients, and also based on the MAIA trial published in 2019 in New England Journal of Medicine, showing DARA-RD is a regimen really effective in this patient population. So our study will compare this RVD light with this DARA-RD. Next slide, please. So the hypothesis is, will this DARA-RD induction regimen offer longer progression-free survival in transplant-ineligible newly diagnosed multiple myeloma patients compared with this RVD light followed by lenalidomide maintenance therapy? And the second question is, will this same regimen offer longer overall survival? Next slide, please. So this schema is just to show you, before I start with how we design this, let me just go over a little bit for our audience who's not familiar with multiple myeloma. So for patients, if they're not transplant eligible, we usually offer induction therapy and followed by the maintenance therapy. For transplant eligible, that is a different story. So for this particular study, we would have 1:1:1 randomization, randomize all our newly diagnosed elderly or frail myeloma patients into 3 different arms. And at the same time, we'll have the risk stratification based on the myeloma frailty score and also revised ISS staging for myeloma. This is according to IMWG criteria. So arm 1 and arm 3 are the regimens we wanted to compare. Arm 1 is for RVD light, followed by Revlimid as maintenance therapy. Arm 3 is DARA-RD as induction therapy, followed by Revlimid maintenance therapy in combination with daratumumab. Currently, there's only one drug approved in the post-transplant maintenance therapy, which is Revlimid alone by FDA. However, this is a common practice to use Revlimid in the maintenance setting for the non-transplant eligible patients. So we initially, for S2105, we initially submitted that concept. We compared these 2 arms. But there is a concern from NCI whether or not we were comparing induction versus maintenance therapy, because these 2 regimens were different. One is based on the phase 2 study, and the other one is based on the phase 2 study from phase 3 MAIA trial. So we added arm 2, which is to use the same induction DARA-RD, but followed by the Revlimid maintenance only, which is the same as arm 1. So this is how the concept was developed and evolved over the course of last 1 year. And all the patients will be treated according to these 2 protocols, which I will not get into too much details, but until disease progression. Next slide, please. So the objectives, as I mentioned earlier, we have actually dual primary study objectives, which will be for dual primary endpoints. So first is to compare the PFS between arm 1 and 2, and then compare OS between arm 1 and arm 3. And the major secondary study objectives will be to compare PFS in arm 1 and 3, and also compare OS in arm 1 versus arm 2, and also compare overall response rate in those patients, arm 1 versus arm 2 and 3 respectively. Same thing for the safety and also median time to response. We actually plan to study the patient-reported outcome, which is one of the important components for this study. Next slide, please. So a couple of key eligibility inclusion. It's most of the inclusion criteria are pretty standard for all the myeloma trials. A couple of things I wanted to point out. Number one, as I mentioned earlier, we want to include the real world patient population. So that's why a lot of lab parameters are very relaxed, so that we can include those community patients, patients in the community setting. And we do have the myeloma frailty index set up, and then they will be categorized into either frail or intermediate. And for the frail patients, they can have any degree of kidney function, and they have to have adequate marrow function with those hemoglobin, platelets, and ANC parameters. And for patients meeting intermediate status, then they have to they can show the kidney function, creatinine clearance with renal failure or bone marrow reserves based on those parameters. I will not go through all those details, but just to give you an idea, we try to use the myeloma frailty index to separate patients into different groups. And the other like ECOG performance status and also organ functions, those are pretty standard. Next slide, please. So for statistics, as I mentioned earlier, we have dual primary objectives. So we have dual primary endpoints here, PFS between arm 1 and 2, and also OS between arm 1 and arm 3. And secondary endpoints is corresponding to our secondary objectives as well. Next slide, please. So risk stratification, as I mentioned at the time of the randomization. So this study, we are planning to enroll about 507 patients based on the sample size calculation, with about 169 eligible patients for each study arm. And this is to account for a 10%, I'm sorry, not eligible, ineligible rate. A total of 188 patients will be accrued per arm. So for a total of 564 patients accrued. We will have primary analysis for the primary endpoints and also interim analysis. The interim analysis for each primary objective will be conducted at 3 time points, timing based on number of events specified pooled over the relevant 2 arms of the objective. And the first interim analysis will test for futility only, while the second and third will be tested for both futility and efficacy. Next slide, please. I believe that is the last one. Yeah. If you have any questions, feel free to reach out to Dr. El-Wadi and Dr. Leap or me. And when we as I mentioned earlier, when we talked about the potential engaging our VA colleagues from SWOG, I think all the involved parties are very excited about this. So I would really appreciate any feedback, comments, and again, Tom will be our champion with the VA group, and I look forward to working with him as well. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Yin. I see Dr. Chauncey on the screen here. Would you like to make some comments?
Yes, thank you. I thank you, Christine. I appreciate your presentation. I appreciate the opportunity to be here. It's my first time here, so I'll just say I know a lot of you from my day job, and I look forward to working with you. My day job is in transplant, which I think a lot of you know. And so, Christine, you and I are going to talk more as this goes on. I just had a general question, potentially quantitative, something to think about. You know, the transplanters we're not as exact as we should be on when someone is eligible and when someone is ineligible. And I wondered if you're going to have quantitative cutoffs to say this is someone who should get a transplant or shouldn't. And also, do you have that, the other part of that is, would someone potentially have the option to opt in, even if we thought transplant was the better way to go. So there might be, in other words, a gray zone there. And this is just something really to think about going forward and how you write the protocol.
I absolutely agree with you, Tom. As a matter of fact, this study, NCI has been discussing with us for one of the reasons. Actually, there's another study for frail patients, not upfront transplant candidate. That is the EQUATE trial from ECOG. I believe it's EAA. It could be 181, but I don't remember exactly, but I believe so. So that study actually is for the transplant ineligible patients. And our study actually, because of that EQUATE study, NCI, they don't want us to have any overlapping patient populations. So that's why this particular study, you will see pretty much you probably don't want to take them to transplant because all those organ functions and also the age, it would be truly not the gray zone of whether or not you can take them or not. Those are the patients real world not eligible, but we certainly will spell it out. And then as I mentioned in the email to you, that we actually haven't started writing the protocol yet, but we definitely would get your input when along the way when we write the protocol.
Good. I look forward to it. And, just as you know, and I don't know if this group has any better handle on how to get a hold of VA demographics, but, as you said, the median age is 70. My suspicion is that, that's right in the wheelhouse of a big Vietnam and veteran cohort that's still getting care. So I think there are going to be a lot of patients, at least for the next 5 to 10 years, that are right in this age group.
Yeah, no, that's good to know, but certainly it's not good for the patients, but I feel like that would be a good opportunity for our patients to get this care, which is, I think, most effective and tolerable regimen for patients. So that's why I feel like confident this trial will bring true benefits to our understudied patient population with unmet needs.
Yeah,
and also by the way, I'm sorry, I haven't mentioned that it will be Subqdara and it will be provided by Janssen.
Good. That's an incentive. And it better be Subq or no one's going to want to go on. All right. Thank you.
You're welcome. So the timeline, probably I was told by our committee, might be like we are hoping we can activate it like a mid of 2022. So that's why I feel early engagement will be great to have this conversation and engagement early on.
Yeah, and that's certainly our intent with getting Dr. Chauncey and our other VA representatives on the disease committees of getting early input as to our population and how we can mold these studies to maybe accrue better to VA. Certainly we can get those demographics for any VA rep on a disease committee, that if that's going to be helpful in your input to these study designs, we can find a way to have that resource available to you.
That's great. So can I ask for a favor? Any way for you to pull some numbers, like, because this study will be above 75 years old with comorbidities. How about we just put a very rough idea up, newly diagnosed myeloma patients above 75 years old, yearly new patient cases. Is that a possibility?
Yeah, I think, and I'm going to ask Sarah to maybe weigh in as well. I think we can ask Mike Kelly, who's runs medical oncology for the VA. He has a lot of this data readily available. And I think he might have something like that, or know how we can obtain that pretty readily. Sarah Schiller, do you know? She says we can ask.
Yeah.
I would say, I mean, I would love to see this data too, but I don't think you're going to see it by newly diagnosed first line relapse. I don't think that exists. It would be great, but I don't think so. It's possible you could kind of try to backdoor it by having this data set and then looking at date of diagnosis and date of first treatment. But well, we'll see what we get. I mean, I would love to see it broken out. I'm just not that optimistic. And the other thing that happens with this data, and again, let's see what Mike has to say, but you know, a lot of people come to the VA, they just come for their drugs and they're followed somewhere else. And some people come here and get everything, and some people get diagnosed and leave, and they all are going to count in, I think, the data set. So just, you know, that when I've looked at this before, that's been the case. But let's see, maybe we can drill down better.
Yeah, I know we have such a strong data science group now, and you know, all this in the corporate data warehouse. It may not be perfect, but I think we can probably get better data than we have, you know, 5-10 years ago.
Great.
Granularity.
So how
I'll
easy?
talk to Dr. Kelly about that. I'm sorry, Dr. Yi.
Oh, no, that's great. That's great. I really appreciate your support, actually. I'm just curious because Annette probably knows my frustration, like how easy to conduct clinical trials through the SWOG network or VA network.
I think that's kind of our goal here, and we're working toward that. I mean, I think we're much farther ahead, again, like in the data science realm as well. You know, we're much farther ahead than we were 5 or 10 years ago. I mean, just the fact that we're a VA committee now, I think means we're much farther along in being able to roll these out. And I would note that anybody that was on the lung map call yesterday, the VA got a big shout out about recruiting to the lung map trials. And so, you know, I think we are making inroads to doing much better than we had in the past. Annette, did you have a comment?
No, it's just a struggle to get trials open, you know, and so I'm hoping, I'm optimistic that our VA is approved now and we can do the central IRB and try to get some of these trials activated.
Right. Yeah. It's I think, you know, between the NCI Central IRB, central office support, a couple other the Navigate program and other things, we keep chipping away at the obstacles and the speed bumps that seem to get in our way. Does anybody else have any questions for Dr. Yi or comments on the study, how it might be helpful to them? And certainly, you know, reach out to her and our myeloma rep, Dr. Chauncey, on the myeloma committee, which we thank very much for taking that on, as well as some of the others we'll mention a little bit on in the agenda. So with that, thank you, Dr. Yi.
Okay.
Enjoy the tennis tournament.
Well, at least he's getting into semifinals.
There you go.
Yeah. Well, thank you so much for this opportunity. Have a great Friday.
All right. You too. Thanks. For thinking of VA when designing this trial.
All right. Thank you. Bye for now.
All right. The next item on our agenda is something that I really didn't know about until I jumped on the ORP call earlier this week, and it's an NCI policy change allowing advanced practice providers to prescribe for studies. And so we quickly pivoted, and I asked Caitlin Hutchinson, who works here at the Rocky Mountain Regional VA Medical Center, who's also an ORP committee member, if she would mind kind of going over this with us. And she also asked Andrea Denikoff of NCI to, if we could borrow her slides. So Caitlin, I'm going to turn it over to you and let you run through this, and then we can talk about this a little bit.
That sounds great. Thanks so much, Steve. I'm so happy to be here. Wish we were all together in Chicago, but at least we're getting together, and I think that we're seeing some things come out of ORP meeting earlier this week that could certainly help the VA, and Steve and I have chatted a bit offline. I'm hoping that we have some slivers of light in our process that we've discussed locally, and that might exist at other VAs as well, for figuring out how to implement some really positive changes that we're seeing with the NCI. So as Steve said, Andrea Denikoff was kind enough to share her slides, and I will go through her talk here. So talk outlines first review of the updated CTEP policy for APPs, ordering study agents in clinical trials. And then it goes into the results of a recent survey that really supported this update, and then discusses updated policy implementation, which is where I think our discussion should really springboard from. So before September 7th of this year, CTEP's investigator handbook stated that patient-specific orders for study agents should be written by NCI registered investigators participating on a particular trial. If other licensed prescribers wrote orders, the registered investigator who was officially participating must co-sign that order. So, and according to the appendix of all of this jargon, is that the investigator was a physician who assumed full responsibility for treatment and evaluation of patients on research protocols, as well as integrity of the data. So they still kind of had the ownership of risk, et cetera. So after the September 7th meeting and going forward, patient orders for study agents, including INDs and standard of care agents, could be written by qualified APPs without requiring a physician cosign. Qualified APPs should still be registered within the NCI registration and credentialing roster system, or the RCR, as non-physician investigators. And they should also be added to delegation task logs to the task of IND prescribing where appropriate. So site clinical investigators need to sign that delegation log for the qualified non-physician investigator to conduct that new task. So there's still some checks and balances there to make sure that the lead physician on the study is aware and approves this role. So qualified APPs may include nurse practitioners, physician's assistants, clinical nurse specialists, advanced degree nurses, and pharmacists who are licensed and qualified for both institutional policy, local and state laws and regulations, including requirements as mandated by international sites, excuse me. So that definition is as broad as it could be, based on the Advanced Practitioner Society for Hematology and Oncology, because I think the NCI really saw that there's a broad suite of APPs that are really well integrated into the programs and could be well served, and the program's well served by them not having to have co-signers. So NCI trials covered under this policy are pretty broad as well. It includes the DCP NCORE program, the ETCTN, the NCTN, and other DCTD and CTEP sponsor networks, consortia, and studies. So this is a very broad implementation. So policy implementation at clinical trial sites. First, sites must have an institution policy that qualifies APPs, including that there's a credentialing process for APPs to write study agent orders that are consistent, again, with local and state laws and regulations, including requirements as mandated for international sites. There also needs to be a statement that a qualified physician investigator is responsible for all trial-related medical decisions, including providing oversight of APPs in their capacity of writing study agent orders. So GCP requirement, and again, we'll see that on the delegation log. And then institution policies can be stored within the site's regulatory policy files and be available for review. So sites need to also ensure that APPs are qualified to write study agent orders within that RCR trial system, and that they renew and maintain their registration and their appropriate qualifications annually. This is in line with what we do for all participants within that RCR system for NCI trials. RCR verifies professional licensure, including APPs, during their annual registration process. So site investigators will also identify APPs qualified to write study agent orders on the site delegation logs where required. Site DTL administrators or CI will need to add that IND prescribing task specifically to the NP IVR. So the mid-level provider needs to be listed there, and the CI has to sign against that task to offer, again, that cross-check. So there are resources available on CTEP's website here, this link, and we can possibly send this out in minutes to provide additional information on these memos. But then let's talk a little bit briefly about kind of the background and the survey that went out that really supports this change in policy. So a little bit of background: GCP guidelines require qualified physicians should be responsible for all trial-related medical decisions. And CTEP also requires that the physician to co-sign APP orders for all agents in CTEP-supported trials until September 7th of this year. ASCO National Survey conducted of APPs that over 40% of APPs report that a physician must co-sign orders, and a quarter reported not being allowed to order chemo. Now, more recently, APP credentialing processes for ordering anti-neoplastics include that some cancer centers have created institutional SOPs and policies that allow them to prescribe anti-neoplastic agents, including investigational agents and non-NCI trials for credentialed APPs. Pharmacy ordering software has also had some barriers where IT security is set at the user level. So if set that APPs can't prescribe the anti-neoplastic, it excludes standard chemo orders that some APPs have been credentialed to order. So even if they have the allowance, there's a systems issue. And then co-signing APP orders creates extra work and interrupts the workflow of credentialed APPs. So CTEP created a survey with input from NCI investigators, the DCP, as well as 6 cancer centers with active APPs involved in clinical trials. The results were open for about a week and a half in March, and the survey was voluntary and sites weren't required to respond to every question. The survey was sent to all LAPS, ETCTN, and NCORE grant PIs, to 111 total groups there. PIs were asked to submit 1 reply per grant, but some shared the email link to the survey with others at different sites under their grant. So because some grants may have submitted more than 1 response, we can't calculate a true response rate. They received 80 completed responses, including a significant number of LAPS, NCORE, and ETCTN sites with affiliations across all US NCTN groups. So 100% of the responding sites said yes to the following question: does your site have APPs, which may include nurse practitioners, physician assistants, clinical nurse specialists, clinical pharmacists involved in cancer patient care? So yes to 100%, and as you can see here, they didn't require an absolute number, but they kind of binned responses. So a fair number of sites have APPs in large numbers caring for cancer patients. So these are sites that have high volumes of APPs. And then for APPs caring for cancer patients, we see that there's a strong amount of involvement across phase 1, 2, and 3 trials. So APPs and time points of ordering anti-neoplastic agents, we can look at across specific types of agents. So for the question regarding NCI agents, this survey didn't allow select sites to select order without physician cosign, but we still see that roughly 1/3 to 1/2 of APPs require a physician cosign. For non-NCI trial agents, it's similar, though we do see that with some modifications of dosing or order and continuation, they can order without physician cosign. With standard of care agents, there's a lot more autonomy seen within the APPs, where a quarter can start a new order and then, going towards a half can modify or order continuation. of a regimen. We still see across all groups so that there's a strong percentage where APPs are not allowed to either be involved in orders or they require a physician cosign. So 42 or roughly 60% of the 71 respondents that said APPs were involved in some way with ordering agents for trials, be it NCI or non-NCI trials with or without physician cosign. 9 or 20%, 21% said they did not have a credentialing process for anti-neoplastics for their APPs. However, all 9 sites only allowed APPs to order trial agents with the physician cosign. So APPs couldn't do so independently. And again, of those responding, 3 sites or 7% said they weren't sure if there was a credentialing process. So 2 of the 3 allowed APPs to sign agents without cosign, and 1 of 3 only allowed APPs to sign with physician cosign. So the role of pharmacists in anti-neoplastic agent ordering. So 48% said that the sites had pharmacists involved in writing orders, and 44% no, and then there was a number, 7% weren't sure. So there were some comments provided by sites. Some stated that pharmacists involved in writing anti-neoplastic orders had the role of just creating the order set and builds in the EMR. Others said that they were involved in determining drug interactions and dosage, or drafting and modifying treatment plans and verifying orders. And some sites indicated that pharmacists could write anti-neoplastic orders, but only with a physician cosign. So we see this cosign issue repeatedly coming up and requiring more involvement of multiple parties before a patient can really have drug. So does your sites perceive NCI policy to require a physician to cosign in CTEP-sponsored trials as a barrier? So nearly 30% of sites said yes, this was a barrier to them doing this research, 70% no. There were some interesting comments here. Modifications frequently required or needed, for example, if patient's weight changes over time and there's a dose modification for toxicity, co-signing changes represents a burden and a time delay for the patients, which I think is a really important thing to consider across sites. Time constraints on MDs make it challenging to facilitate MD signing of orders and creates a burden on staff to find a physician to sign orders. The NCI's policy doesn't align with state and institutional policy, and difficult for staff to remember to have this extra step for NCI trials that's not required for other non-NCI studies. This leads to major deviations and issues with trial conduct and our ability to function as a cohesive institution. All of these points I think are pretty important to discuss. So if the NCI sites allow sites with a credentialing process for APPs to write anti-neoplastic order for NCI trials, including investigational agents, would they be more involved? Over 50% of sites said yes. The change would reduce staffing burdens and ordering delays, would allow physicians more time for new participant enrollments and other study requirements, reduce the complexity of NCI trial workflows being different from other types of trials and standard of care, and it might lead to improved study recruitment and enrollment to have APPs more involved in clinical NCI clinical trials. So as of October 4th, the new policy has been implemented where CTSU has shown 92 sites now have approved MPIVRs, APPs, for the IND prescribing tasks on DTLs for 78 protocols. 380 individual MPIVRs have been approved for the IND prescribing task. And then of 78 protocols, 68 were NCTN with a decent spread across the different groups. So there were 9 ETCTN protocols and 1 pediatric PEP-CTN protocol. And I'm just going to throw another comment in here that not all studies are requiring DTLs. You can keep other types of logs. So I suspect that there's more MPIVRs that might be participating that we're not quite sure of yet. And then updated APP policy continued. Here we go. Of 92 sites, there might be some overlap here between trial types. 84 sites added MPIVRs as IND prescribers to those logs. So 15 were NCTN LAPS grantee sites, 52 were NCORE, and 17 were NTTN rostered sites. 11 sites added MPIVRs to ETCTN, and 2 added to the pediatric PEP-CTN. So we can see that there's a shift happening pretty rapidly, which is encouraging. But I wanted to talk with the VA group in general about how we might implement this or consider this for across VAs, because we have to think about different state regulations to the credentialing process. But at least locally, we've done a little bit of sniffing around, and it seems that there's not a mandate within our VA prohibiting an APP from ordering. We have a current practice pattern of having a cosign on anti-neoplastic agents, but it's not a requirement. And I think that there could be room for exceptions made for participation in investigational trials through the NCI. And I know that our APPs are very dedicated to the research offerings that we have. So I'm guessing that's similar elsewhere.
Okay. Thanks, Caitlin. So I just wanted to open this up to others of how you think this may help in your area. As Caitlin said, here we don't have anybody doing it without co-signatures. But I did ask our clinical oncology pharmacist, and even though she doesn't prescribe right now, she thought maybe actually under a protocol, it would be actually maybe even a little easier because it's so much more directed than just kind of regular care. So under protocols, and if you follow that, it should be pretty straightforward. So, thoughts from others?
I see that Melody has said that with full practice authority, APRNs can prescribe neoplastic agents if credentialed at her site. That's good. I think that it'd be interesting to try to get a read across different geographies about state and local policy interacting with the credentialing process, as well as just historical VA practice patterns. I don't know if a survey trying to build something could be warranted to at least put out to some of the more active clinical trial sites across geographies.
Yeah, we could look into doing something like that. The other thought I had too was that would this open up the possibility of doing more kind of decentralized research where maybe you don't have that physician at a CBOC or an outlying, like in our setting, let's say Cheyenne, Wyoming, but you have the capability of doing something there if you had an advanced practice provider.
I think this is something that could be explored pretty well through some of the lung pop program and other hub and spoke models for implementation.
Right. Because we have LPOP and PopCap and probably other pops coming. All the pops. So, all right. Any other comments before we move on? All right. Thanks, Caitlin.
You bet.
Now for some committee updates. Official VA committee membership rostering. Leslie or Connie, I didn't see Connie on, but Leslie, do you have any information on we're getting everybody rostered as official committee members? Is that?
Yeah, that was basically just a general statement. I thought we should add that I think as of this point, we have everybody who, to my understanding, was on the committee officially rostered in our database. That being said, we've had some sufficient workload, unfortunately, that we have not been able to get official letters out to all those committee members to let you know, to notify you of that, but we still do plan to do that, hopefully within the next couple weeks, if all goes well. But yeah, we did send a roster to Steve a couple weeks back, and I think we're lined up in that regard. That everybody who's been attending and understands they're on the committee is currently officially listed as a member.
Okay, terrific. All right, and then Sarah Schiller, can you update us on the tandem enrollment advice? This has kind of dropped off my radar with a bunch of other things, and I know you've been working on this some with the Navigate group, and just kind of where we're at with that and where we're going.
Sure. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay. So I think we've talked a lot about it before on this call and in various other arenas, that there's an issue for sites that wish to open radiation oncology trials or trials that have radiation oncology as a component of them, if the site does not have those services on site, and if they have to send patients to the academic affiliate or an offsite location to receive those services. So that's what we're talking about here in terms of forming a advisory group or a working group that can help us to work through those issues. I think we've tried a number of approaches in the past, including reaching higher up in the NCTN group and with various leadership levels in the VA and at NCI. And we're still, I think, struggling to come up with a process that will work for all sites at this point. I know a few of our sites who are participating in SWOG trials have had some success, so I'm hoping that we can move this forward in the next year or so. But at this point, I don't have any solid progress to relay to the group, other than I'm hoping we can really get a work group up off the ground. I know that everyone's busy, but I think it's going to be a lot of trial and error and figuring out a process that we can implement at a few sites and then hopefully expand to additional sites.
And you have a good sense of those successful sites that we can reach out to for pearls of wisdom?
I do. I don't want to call them out on the call in case, but I think we have a number of sites who have had some initial success, and I think we have a number of investigators who are very interested in this and very willing to put in the time and the effort to move it forward. So I'm hoping that this group will form sort of organically and we can make some progress.
Okay, so we'll keep working on that front. All right, any other comments on tandem enrollment and what you'd like to see or successes you might have had? All right. The next topic we're going to talk about is, we kind of briefly touched on this with Dr. Chauncey. We now have official VA liaisons on the SWOG research committees. We have Dr. Goodman and GU. I'm sorry, Cheryl, I don't know how to say your last name properly and I don't want to mess it up. For Long and Dr. Long for Long as well, Dr. Ma for lymphoma, again, Dr. Johnson for myeloma, and Dr. Park for symptom control and quality of life, which is great. I see in the meeting book, they're all listed as VA representatives, and this is something that people have been, or folks in VA have been looking at for a while to have some representation. That so when these studies are being developed, there's some thought about how our population may or may not fit into these studies and maybe adjusting them accordingly. So thank all of you for stepping up to do that. And we're going to be looking to place others on other committees in the coming years. So thank you. Any comments from any of our representatives or others? All right. VA accrual report for SWOG. Leslie, do you have that information?
Yes, I do. Let me just get it together here. Okay, let's see if you could advance the next slide, please. Okay, so it's pretty self-explanatory. I did some comparison, which is not on this screen, but did some comparison with what we had the last time this was run. And pretty much all the sites listed on here are maintaining the same close numbers to what they were previously. There have been some minor tweaks here and there. Let's see, the only major one, and I don't know the explanation, of course, VA Loma Linda went from 10 the last time around to 1 this time. Otherwise, they're within a number or two of what they were before. As far as when you get underneath the Maverick sites, I wanted to point out that Gainesville and Philadelphia are brand new. And so we look forward to their participation and perhaps some numbers the next time around. If you want to advance the next slide, please. We see that West Haven, yes, they're on the screen. West Haven is still out there running ahead of the pack. Congratulations on that. Let's see, Salt Lake went down from 8 the last time to 1. And again, this isn't trying to call anybody out. I'm just trying to report, you know, the numbers have changed up and down, and I'm sure all the clinics across the country are seeing similar changes. And then to the last slide for this section, there we see, let's see, VA-MC Bronx went from 14 to 8. And then the total compared to last time we had, excuse me for just a moment here. The total was 104 registrations, and this time we have 83. And again, you know, I don't know the explanations, but you know, there've been so many ups and downs this past year, of course, that self-explanatory, I guess. So.
Yeah. All right. Any comments on VA accrual? Any particular issues anybody's seen at their site with accrual other than kind of the usual suspects? All right. And then also under this section, we're going to talk about the VA mentoring advisory group. Again, kind of something that we haven't really fully developed yet. And I think Sarah's going to kind of take point on this as well until she goes on leave for a while in mid-November. At that point, Caitlin has agreed to step in and help, so we can kind of get together a group of mentors and advisors that especially new sites can reach out to for advice. And so that's still in development. Sarah, did you want to add anything to that?
Sure. I think in the Maverick group, our storefront, we have had some good experience with taking on new sites and getting them up to speed in working on SWOG and NCTN trials. And then in other places in the VA, particularly in the nodes group, we've seen some great success they've had with getting new sites on board in this mentoring model. So between our program that we've run here out of Maverick and then other networks in the VA, I think we have a good idea of how a mentoring program might be set up. And I think it will be really beneficial for VA sites that are either fairly new to SWOG or wish to join SWOG somewhere down the road and would benefit from hearing from more experienced sites. So we'll get that together as well.
Okay. Any thoughts on that from anybody in the group? All right. Just to mention, we just awarded a Hope Foundation integration, VA integration grant this week. We're just doing one this year, and that was awarded Northeast Ohio, Cleveland, Dr. Knox group out there, and that'll be going forward. And kind of rolling into that, we're thinking about just based on the interest level in the VA integration grants and the utility of that money of thinking about proposing maybe switching that grant to funding a storefront, a new storefront, because as Sarah and Colleen and the group in Visit One will tell you, they're kind of maxed out on what they can do in their storefront, and they get constant requests to join that storefront. They really can't support it anymore, so we need it. At least one new storefront, probably more, to accommodate VAs who couldn't necessarily get the accrual that is needed to stay in the group on their own, but we can do that in the storefront model. So again, with Sarah's help, who seems to do most of the work here, that we're starting to develop a storefront proposal that we'd like to roll out and see how that goes. But it's still early in development. And I was just wanted to see if anybody had any comments on that, what you thought about going with the storefront approach instead of maybe individual grants, or going with both, or what others in the committee think. What group today? So we'll keep heading on that road, and as we develop something that's presentable, we will send that out to some folks and get some feedback. Sarah, any further comment on that? Colleen, Dr. Brophy?
Well, just for the this Mary, just Mary Brophy. So just for folks, part of the reason, for probably regional or a group of storefronts is storefront has recruitment requirements of 10 patients over a 3-year time period. But it's a hub and spoke type model where there's a hub that leads the storefront, and all accruals for the storefront add up from all of those sites. So it does allow for sites that may not be able to reach recruitment targets to stand on their own to participate in the trials. And I think, as Sarah's pointed out, we've learned a lot in doing this. And I think, if someone's interested in a storefront, very willing to talk to them about, we learned a lot about picking sites and making sure that before we put them in the storefront, that they have the infrastructure in place at the sites to be able to actually be successful. Learned a lot about how to get people into the central IRB and help them get through it. And also I think some of the ideas of this mentoring program also came out of this, because if you have a hub storefront with a team that really knows what they're doing with NCI trials, it's much easier to help newer sites as they begin to open up to give them some support. Also, the other thing is that you're linked together as a group, not only for recruitment purposes, but also for regulatory purposes as well. And that's part of the reason for why we're limited in how many sites we can take on, because with Sarah as sort of our lead in our hub, we get all the, the reports of overdue reports, and we have to follow up with the sites to make sure the data is being sent up appropriately, make sure that people are ready, excuse me, for their audits, etc., because any one site reflects upon the entire hub. So if we had one huge VA storefront, we would all be linked together and everyone would be at risk for one site if there was a problem. So, and the ability to monitor that as a storefront lead is important. It's not just getting the recruitments in, it's executing the trials appropriately and making sure that we're doing not only getting patients in, but actually doing the trials well and participating as a very high quality group within the organization. So if anyone's interested in it, as I'm sure you're writing in the write-ups, some of the requirements are the tasks that really the storefront encompasses. Being the hub of a storefront encompasses, I'm sure will be spelled out in this. And if folks are interested, I'm sure Sarah, myself, Colleen would be happy to talk to anybody about that. Thanks, Steve.
Okay. Any other comments? All right. So, I just wanted to mention too, SWOG's done a great job of putting up a bunch of additional resources on the website that I think everybody should take a look at. There's a bunch of clinical research resources under a specific tab there that directs you to a lot of different things. And actually, some of those are also under our VA workbench as well. There was a couple of links I noticed that worked better under our workbench than under the clinical research resources tab. We'll figure those out as they go. So I just wanted to point everybody out to, go to the SWOG site. There's a bunch of resources there that have really been being developed, and I think those are great for everybody. And then I'd also like everybody to take a look at our VA workbench. It's got some stuff on there, but I'd like to, just have everybody, when you get a chance, get onto the SWOG website, take a look at the VA workbench, see what works for you, what you would like, if there's something you'd like to see there, something that would be helpful to you, some resources that we could put up there, certainly as we get the mentoring thing going, we could have some of the a mentor link there and that sort of thing. So if anybody's looked at that, if you have any comments right now, or you can send them to me, that we can look at expanding those resources, make them as useful to everybody as possible. So, any thoughts from anybody? And have any of you looked at those resources, or and had any luck with those? So. All right. And then, Sarah, do you want to talk about the CME credits because of firewall issue with VA?
Yes, so I know a few people who have attended SWOG sessions this week were trying to fill out the form to get CME credits, but it's blocked by the VA firewall. So if you don't want to deal with going on your personal computer or whatever to fill out that form, we have a workaround form. I think it's just a Word document that you can fill out. So you can, I'll put my email here. You can email me or Leslie or Steve, and we can get that to you.
Okay. And
oh yeah, and Leslie put you can also ask VA member. So get your credits.
That's right. So any other, I'm going to just kind of open it up now for anything that anybody else wanted to talk about in terms of the VA committee, VA and SWOG, comments, complaints. We're way ahead of time. Didn't have quite as full agenda this time, but hopefully that'll be different in Seattle. And just of note, those of you, if we can meet in person, it will be in Seattle in April, which is a little bit different than the San Francisco, Chicago dyad that we usually have. And it's a little bit earlier, but maybe a nice change of pace. All right. If there's no other comments, I'll give you back an hour of your day. Always good on a Friday. And if you wanted to bring something up and you didn't feel comfortable, or you think about it later, feel free to email me or to that VA member at swog.org, and we can address it. So appreciate everybody coming, and have a great weekend. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you, guys.
Thanks.